This is Alien Isolation, a linear open-world Metroidvania horror game, and by all traditional game development wisdom, it should not exist. The year is 2014, and a game with the potential to redefine the horror genre is about to release. But there is a problem. This game has an identity crisis. After you crash land on the seemingly abandoned Sevastopol station, you reach this transit station, which connects you across the entire ship. But pretty quickly, if you're anything like me, you'll notice that while you technically can go to some of these areas, there is literally nothing to do once you get there. See, this is by design, because to get to any actually useful areas, you'll need to unlock new tools, which will allow you to explore further and further into the station. This style of design is known as a Metroidvania, just like the game Hollow Knight. But here's what makes it fundamentally strange. You see, usually Metroidvanias will leave the player to explore the world on their own terms. But in Alien Isolation, despite having a semi-open world that is incredibly large, it really does not want you doing anything but going down the very linear path the story sets out. So much so that you literally cannot make any progress unless you follow each individual mission marker to get to the next point. And now you might be thinking, I'm being critical, and yeah, that's because I am. But I don't think that this necessarily makes the game worse. You see, unlike in games like Amnesia the Bunker, which give you a clear goal and just lets you figure out your own way on how to escape, Alien Isolation gives you a very hand-holdy approach. However, this is where it gets really interesting. They do give you a small amount of freedom and control, just enough to keep you engaged and having fun without getting lost in this enormous ship. You see, the game is made up of about 17 missions, and each one is about 1 to 2 hours long. And each one has a bunch of mini subquests that take only about 20 minutes each of which will also need you to figure out your own path to get to the location without either getting shot by a bunch of people or getting eaten by the alien. But that brings me to my second point, the absolute genius of the alien AI and the utter stupidity of the human AI. I mean, just look at this. In the alien world, you run into 3 main enemy types: humans, working Joes, and of course, the alien. This alien is probably the most intelligent AI in video games, even to this day. But there's a problem. You see, the more you hide in lockers, the more the alien checks them. The more you hide under desks, the more it starts to realize slowly but surely that that is where you are. It's so intelligent that you can even bluff attacks against it by holding your flamethrower at it, which will make it hesitate. But the more you do that, the more it knows you're bluffing and will just chase you down and end up killing you. And good luck trying to survive that. And that's great and all. But then you run into humans. These guys are stupid. You see, they have literally just seen an alien crash through the roof of the building. And in fact, they know that this 8 feet tall super abomination of genetic perfection is trying to hunt them down and murder them, and it is literally standing a few meters in front of them. Yet the moment they see you, someone who may be unarmed and not want to hurt them at all, they see you and think you're a massive threat instead of this alien, and will just start shooting at you and make a bunch of noise, and they get eaten by the alien. This is very dumb, and it ends up creating this really weird dichotomy, which leads straight into the game's third problem, or rather, amazing bit of game design. Incredibly early on in the game, you get access to the revolver, allowing you to solve your problems by violent means. And for a very short while, you feel invincible, just tearing through waves and waves of enemies, until you first meet the alien and realize that your gun does nothing. The moment you realize this just a moment too late is a genius bit of game design. Because the developers give you this massive power boost and suddenly snatch it away from you as you get eaten. Probably your first death to the alien, and immediately this sets up the absolute terror and power of this beast. I would know, as that's exactly what happened to me. From this point on, you start to get terrified. You're always looking over your shoulders, waiting to see if the alien will appear. You see, this is the point where you know just enough to be scared, but not so much that you know how to predict and perfectly avoid this alien. And pretty quickly, as you start shooting enemies, you'll also realize that the noise of your gun was what attracted the alien in the first place, which is a bit ironic, but also gives you a difficult dilemma of whether to avoid the enemies or permanently solve your problems, but at the cost of something much greater. But this feeling doesn't really last very long. These are save points, and you can practically hear them halfway across the map. And these are your only way of making any permanent progress. But the thing is, they are very, very rare. Typically about 10 minutes of gameplay at least between them. And even once you get there, you have 3 seconds of this blaring noise, which will attract every enemy, including the alien, to your position. And then they might just end up killing you right before you save. And that's cool and all, but here's where the problem really lies. As soon as you get to your save point, all tension just dies. In fact, you lose absolutely no progress if you die. And there's even a reward to dying, because you can end up resetting where the alien is so you can get a slightly easier path to your next objective, or just reset in order to save resources if you've ended up messing up. This immediately kills all of the stakes in the game and gets you to start gaming the system. And the same problem exists in another excellent horror game, Amnesia: The Bunker. Despite it being nearly perfect, there was a moment where I had an intense but admittedly avoidable chase. It ended up costing me a bunch of resources, so I ended up just letting myself get killed in order to get my resources back and reset. This is where I end up having a bit of a controversial opinion. Permanent punishment for death, even if minor. By adding a very, very small punishment, say even it's just losing a couple of resources or ammo, or maybe it just makes it so that you can't access certain bits of lore, then the game ends up massively discouraging players from just gaming the system by dying to reset their progress. And this ends up boosting the stakes so much more and adding so much more terror to the game. But as soon as you cross this razor-thin line between frustration and tension, which, by the way, varies from player to player, you'll start to frustrate the player so much and they'll eventually just quit the game, which is, by the way, far worse than having no punishment at all, which is fair enough why the devs wanted to avoid this. Now, it may seem like my points are really negative about the game, but that's not really my intention. You see, I really enjoyed this game, almost as much as you might enjoy subscribing. In fact, it was the second horror game I'd ever completed, and this is why I'm analysing it so deeply, because there are so many tiny problems that would be so easy to fix, and the game would suddenly be so much better. And this, unfortunately, brings me to the story. Let me just make this clear. This game has endless padding. Go here and do meaningless task. Oh wait, you can't do that meaningless task because you need to go and do this task first, and you do that task first. Oh wait, no, that didn't matter at all because it all blew up and you don't want to go there anyway, and now you've got all these things that you need to deal with, and you do this over and over and over for 20 hours of playtime until finally you achieve something. Not only that, but the game designs an incredibly infuriating story. You're meant to end up thinking that you've removed this alien from the space station, or at least killed it, at least 3 or 4 times throughout the entire story. And every time, through a totally shocking turn of events, it somehow came back. Now, I get it. This is meant to make the alien seem like this unstoppable, absolutely merciless force. But really, it just ends up kind of being this dull and repetitive thing that becomes really predictable by the first time it's happened. Now, these issues in the storytelling really start to build, despite the core of the game's story being actually quite good. And it ends up just undermining it more and more until it starts getting frustrating. That is really where the issues end and the genius game design of Alien Isolation begins. This is a motion tracker. Its main use is to locate enemies and help you avoid them. But there is one massive problem. It is incredibly loud. And you know who has super hearing? Yes, the near invincible, unkillable super alien murder machine whose sole job is to kill you. Just guess what happens if you pull this tracker out when you're near the alien. How incredibly unpredictable. This is an absolutely amazing game design mechanic, as it forces you to consider each and every bit of information and time you use this, weighing up whether you want to potentially just get eaten by the alien, or if that information is useful enough that it actually is worth risking all of that. And in one situation, you just get eaten. And that's bad because you made too much noise. And in the other, you also get eaten because you didn't know where the alien was and you just walked right into it because you weren't using a motion tracker. And either way, it's a very stressful situation, but not as stressful a situation as when you're walking and start hearing this. "99% of terror comes from sound, especially when you can't hear the enemy. And that's what makes Alien Isolation so terrifying, as most of the time, you don't have any idea where the alien is, but still you constantly hear it scraping through vents and its tail rattling, and this constantly reminds you that you are always being watched. But the audio design doesn't stop there. In fact, The silence that it uses might just be its best trick. You see, despite what you might imagine for a massive AAA game based on an entire film series, there is very little music, and it's mainly replaced by ambient noises of the ship breaking down and also the alien following you. And this really immerses you in the game world, which makes everything immediately much more terrifying. Here's GTA 5, a game that was released 1 year before Alien Isolation. And while it looks okay, it really doesn't compare to this. In fact, even compared to some modern games, Alien Isolation doesn't just hold up to them, but oftentimes actually surpasses them. This is down to a few key factors, and number one being their custom deferred cathode engine rendering pipeline with deferred lighting or something. It's a mouthful. Now, I don't fully understand how this all works, but what I do understand is the effect it has on the game. So what does that mean? Well, the team behind Alien Isolation developed their own proprietary lighting system years ahead of anything else, which is why, despite the game being designed to run on an Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, it still used this bespoke lighting engine for super realistic runtime lighting and reflections, which honestly still looks better than 90% of modern AAA releases, despite them not baking any lights before runtime. But the secret, even more important technique to the absolutely amazing graphics was this one little trick. Let's look back at GTA 5 and now Alien Isolation. Notice any difference about the world beyond the graphics? Well, if you guessed that GTA 5 is a massive city and Alien Isolation is this very claustrophobic and cramped space, then you'd be exactly right. This is a restricted play space, and it really benefits graphical performance. See, unlike in these large open world games where they need to render many kilometers of world at any given time, in Alien Isolation you rarely see more than a few meters in front of you. And this allows them to utilize beyond any other game one of the most powerful techniques in video game optimization: culling. Basically, all it means is that the game doesn't render anything that the camera doesn't see. Pretty simple. This makes it so that instead of rendering the whole space station at once, it's only rendering a very small area around the player, allowing them to pack huge amounts of detail into every crevice, unlike in the open world games where in some moments you'll be looking at pretty much the entire map at once. And all of this somehow packed into a 20-hour experience designed to be played on an Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3, which really makes you think that this game really shouldn't exist. Just like something else that shouldn't exist. That time I made a corporate murder simulator in only 5 days. Click here to check it out.